Good evening. Welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. And I'm so delighted to welcome you here on this very special evening. It is the final lecture in our spring season, and we are really ending with a bang this evening. So thank you so much for coming. The series, of course, will resume in the fall. Our lectures are supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. And for those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The Society was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of the City of New York, which at that time in particular, 22 artisans. So today, this 230-year organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our educational and cultural programs. These include our lock collection, which you can see upstairs, the library, of course, which you're sitting in now, our Mechanics Institute, which is tuition-free, and our nearly 200-euro lecture series, of which, of course, tonight's lecture is part of. We, as I mentioned at the beginning, have a particularly special program this evening to conclude the spring series, a program that celebrates the launch of the Bowery Boys, Adventures in Old New York, the official companion book to the travel podcast by the Bowery Boys that offers an unconventional exploration of Manhattan's historic neighborhoods, secret spots, and colorful characters. And we're so pleased to have the Bowery Boys here this evening. The book is published by the independent press, Ulysses Press, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank their publicity director, Courtney Joy, for all her help, and also the General Society's own program coordinator, Meg Stanton, for bringing the publication of this book to our attention. And finally, to Andrea and Alana at Books on Call for selling books this evening. The Bowery Boys podcast started in 2007 when longtime friends Greg Young and Tom Meyers plugged in a karaoke microphone and started recording. And as you know, the rest is literally history. Now, 9 years later, the podcast has more than 250,000 downloads per month and has been deemed one of the best city-centric series by the New York Times. It's acclaimed as a vital resource for those who love storytelling and history. The Bowery Boys recently won the 2015 GANYC Award for Outstanding Achievement in Radio Program Podcasts. Tonight, the Bowery Boys, Greg Young, and Tom Meyers will discuss, among other things, top hidden secrets of New York. And after the program, there will be a book signing and reception. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Greg Young and Tom Meyers.
Wow. That is an introduction. Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Look where we're at. This place is absolutely gorgeous. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you to present a little bit of our shtick, and then
we should introduce ourselves.
Oh, right. My name is Greg Young.
And I'm Tom Meyers.
And together we do the Bowery Boys New York City History podcast and blog and all the other stuff that we do on top of it as well.
And we are really honored to be here, very humbled to be here, especially to close out this excellent series of lectures.
Thank you.
So thank you very much to Karen and to the entire team here at the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. It's a wonderful organization, and if you are not already a member or attending the lectures and series and programming that is available here, it's definitely something that's worth looking into.
And we'd like to thank all of you here who are listeners of our show, or those who follow the blog and follow us on all the various social media. And in fact, who here does a show of hands listens to our show? I just want to see. All right.
Just curious.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So we have about half of the crowd here. That's good. So then maybe we can pull back and kind of explain what it is that we do, because we started in 2007 a podcast, and just pulling back a little bit further, a podcast is basically on-demand radio, so on-demand audio programming that people can listen to through their computers.
And so since 2007, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month, currently 2 times a month, we talk about the various aspects of New York City history, and it can be any kind of thing. It could be the Lenape Indians, which was our subject of our show just a couple weeks ago, or it could also be Studio 54, which we've also spoken about.
We like to spend time talking, it seems like we talk a lot about Robert Moses, about sometimes demonizing, early on demonizing perhaps a bit unfairly. Also Jane Jacobs, who Robert Moses was the subject of our 100th episode, which was probably 5 years ago.
Yes, and then Jane Jacobs was just a few months ago. We also go back far back to New Amsterdam, and of course to the Gilded Age. So this book in particular focuses mostly on history that resides in New York, i.e. Manhattan, during the 18th and 19th centuries. Places that you can find here. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, Tom. We usually start our podcast with a situate the listener, okay? So we need to situate ourselves because we are here in this extraordinary institution with a deep, rich history. I just happened to find something, Tom.
He's always happening to find things.
From the New York Tribune, January 14th, 1900, okay? So not yesterday. The headline, An Ancient Trade School, the new quarters of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. Among the old New York institutions, there are probably none so little known to the general public as the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, which removed a short time ago from its old quarters in East 16th Street to its new and beautifully furnished home, number 18 to 24 West 44th Street, which is this building. The society was founded in 1785. A meeting called for the purpose took place at Walter Hayer's Tavern in King Street, now Pine Street, near Broadway. Robert Boyd, who was the sheriff from 1787 to 1801, presided.
The article continues. The meetings were held in taverns, as was the custom in those days, but in May 1802, the society purchased from ex-mayor Richard Varick a plot of land at the northwest corner of Broadway and Robinson Street, now Park Place, where the society erected a mechanics hall, which was dedicated with appropriate ceremony in the presence of Mayor Edward Livingston in 1803.
I mean, they were in the heart of it all the big names connected to the General Society. So 213 years later, a lot of other things happened, 213 years between there and now. But, so that's a situation of the place, and now I think we need to situate ourselves for just a little bit before we launch into our proper presentation.
Greg and I both moved to New York in 1993. Both from the Midwest, so we're both transplants to the city. I moved from Ohio to attend Columbia.
And I moved here from Missouri, and I just have to say that I lived at Park and 23rd Street and paid $300 a month. I don't know where that in New York went, but anyway, we both eventually we became good friends at that point. In 1997, Tom moved to the Lower East Side, as did I just a couple years later, about 3 blocks away.
And I think that we have a crowd here who knows city geography pretty well. So I lived at Essex and Canal, right across the street from Seward Park, for 19 years until last August.
Yeah. And we had our own careers that went along the side. I was in the music industry, and Tom was in travel. But, my love of history and my love of writing mixed in with equally charming love of New York City that Tom holds, until we get to 2007, the day that I purchased a MacBook, those white laptops that look like they're like made for children. So I got one of those, and it had this program called GarageBand, and we had just heard of this brand new kind of emerging media called the podcast. There weren't a lot of them back then, but there was enough that this program GarageBand had a way you could record a podcast. So I was like, hey Tom, let's record a podcast.
He had to explain to me what a podcast was, and then I bought Podcasting for Dummies, which was out, and learned how to record a show and edit a show, and we decided, well, okay, what do we do? Let's make a podcast on the spot about the history of, and we looked out my window at Canal Street and said, let's do it on Canal Street. So we recorded a really bad first show on the history of Canal Street.
But they got better, and we eventually took the name the Bowery Boys from the 19th century gang. We were very influenced, obviously, by Gangs of New York and Herbert Asbury and, of course, Martin Scorsese movies. So we sort of took that on as our guys, not realizing at the time how uniquely horrible they were. But we wanted to reinvent that. So over the next 9 years, we produced over 200 podcasts, and we just were releasing one next week. We just released one last week. And
every 2 weeks.
And it was every subject from, that's what I meant, any subject from the great fires of New York City to the Revolutionary War to the disappearance of Dorothy Arnold, to anyone and any way, any approach that we can find New York City history to make it interesting, that's what we'll try.
We try to make it interesting.
Which leads us to the book.
Well, and just to also add that if you haven't heard a podcast before and you have a smartphone, you can probably get a podcast app, and then you can download these, and it's worth noting that these are free. So if you like the book, or you like our presentation this evening, hopefully, you can, and you want to listen to more, there's like hours and hours, days and days and weeks that you can listen to us go
nattering on and on and on. But the book sort of was born out of this and all this knowledge and stories that we had told. And we wanted to give people a sort of like, what would it be like to go on a walking tour through old New York with these two guys, right? So that's essentially what it is. It's a hybrid travel history guide that looks at Manhattan from the bottom of Manhattan, or rather even, Governor's Island and Ellis Island, all the way up to the very tip, the very top of Manhattan and Inwood and Washington Heights.
So we divided the book into 25 chapters. The opening pages are an article that's usually focused on a podcast that we did related to something in that chapter. And then there are about 20 to 25 points of interest that you can visit in each chapter. Sometimes these are really big, heavy hitters that everybody knows about. Other times they are less, let's say, more obscure places,
Sure.
which we'll be going through tonight. And then sometimes, I think our favorite are places that have vanished. So worth visiting and imagining what had been there before.
So what we're going to do tonight is, so we have hundreds and hundreds of these points of interest in the book.
450.
Did you count them? Did someone else count them? Did you count them? We are going to present to you 10 of some of our favorites. I mean, of course, if I were to do this exercise tomorrow, I'd pick a different 10 because New York is that rich. But we chose 10 that kind of give a nice reflection of New York City, generally speaking, and things that have a closeness to my heart, at least.
And I think it's worth noting also that we said that we limited the scope of the book to Manhattan. That's an obvious thing that needs to be pointed out here. Because most of the book deals with the city prior to 1898, and this is old New York, and we're defining it as, it was Manhattan Island.
And we have to have something for a sequel, so clearly we may get to those later.
Aspirational.
So without further ado, we'd like to present 10 little nuggets from the book that are things that I hope evoke thoughts of old New York and wonderful nostalgia for the city that was here and that still exists today. So Tom, let me operate the clicker.
Exciting.
And operate. Oh yeah, look at that.
All right, so, and we should also note that this is the first reading that we've ever done. So
Can you tell?
If we're a little awkward, if we read too quickly, too slowly, just feel free to tell us.
Throw something at us.
This is an illustration of Beach's Pneumatic Tube. This is actually the subject of our last podcast that is available right now for downloading, free of charge. This was located on Broadway between Warren and Murray Streets, next to City Hall. The wind tunnel, this is a vanished site. In one of the gutsiest moves ever in the history of New York City, Alfred Eli Beach, a man truly afflicted with tunnel vision, dug the city's first subway tunnel in 1870, less than a block from City Hall, without the city's permission. Well, technically, he did have the city's permission to build a pneumatic mail tube. He just interpreted that as meaning a tunnel that could comfortably also accommodate a mailman. The short tunnel operated on pneumatic power and consisted of a train car propelled by wind produced by large fans. Intended only as a demonstration, Beach's subway line was a choice novelty for a couple of years before closing in 1873. All traces of this glorious pneumatic system are today sadly gone. To approximate its very short journey today, start on Warren Street and Broadway, walk south on Broadway 1 block, and turn again on Murray Street. What a ride! What's interesting is that this was 1870 to 1873, and there would be more than 30 years that would pass before the subway system would actually open. We make kind of a joke here about it being, this 1 block novelty ride, but it was intended to demonstrate like the power of pneumatic design, and he was pitching the city on developing an entirely pneumatic subway system.
It would have stretched all of Manhattan. It would have gone under the water and into the Bronx. It would have never worked.
He got a charter for it too, but they ran out of money.
I shall take you to a hole in the ground in Soho. This is the haunted well at 129 Spring Street. Tucked away in the basement of a European clothing chain on Spring Street sits the remains of the Manhattan Well, a centuries-old well that was the source of one of the city's most famous ghost stories. In the winter of 1800, the body of Elma Sands was found strangled at the bottom of this well, when this area was called at the time Lispenard Meadows. Her groom-to-be, Levi Weeks, was tried in court for her murder, but was eventually acquitted. It helped that he had excellent representation. Some of you may know this already. He was famously represented by future Broadway musical stars Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, fighting together for him before they, of course, would fight each other. The Manhattan Well was eventually covered up, but stories of a haunted specter have vexed the buildings that have stood over it ever since. Today, you can gawk at this historic structure while strolling between racks of clothing. It's not just the prices that may spook you.
Has anybody here visited this well, seen this well?
It's like,
it's the cause, it's COS.
Like, it's
clothing
so, store. You can go down and, it's actually, I think the discount rack is down there, which I don't know if that's
the men's department
inappropriate.
Moving on to the Lower East Side, to Ludlow and Broome Street. Greg?
Oh my goodness, sorry.
Moving on to the prison of Boss Tweed. The Ludlow Street Jail, formerly located at the southeast corner of Ludlow and Broome Streets, opened in 1862 and sat for many years smack in the middle of a stretch of tenements. Originally a debtor's prison, the red brick jail complex had 87 cells and an open courtyard. It later kept county detainees, some of whom could pay a little extra to receive perks, like comfier accommodations, tastier food, and other upgrades. One of these VIP inmates was the notoriously corrupt leader of the Tammany Hall political machine, William Boss Tweed, who died inside a prison cell here on April 12, 1878. But not before escaping from his cell in 1875. He fled to Spain, but was hastily recaptured. The location where he was born, on Cherry Street, was only a short walk away. And this is the site today, it's worth noting, of the Seward Park campus, formerly the Seward Park High School. And just 2 blocks away from where we both lived.
And that's really strange, isn't it? By the way, Cherry Street, I just think a funny, this is a trivia question. George Washington, one of his 2 homes when he was, of course, the president, and this was the capital of America for a very short period of time, was also on Cherry Street. So it just shows you how the city changed so drastically over those particular decades. We're now going to go to the dogs, to the Rooftop Horse Hospital. In 1866, philanthropist Henry Bergh formed the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the ASPCA, or they're still with us today, partially to serve the needs of horses, the principal pullers of Gilded Age New York's street transportation. But by 1914, it had also become fashionable to keep pets at home. It was then that the ASPCA opened the free hospital and dispensary for animals, the first full-service animal hospital in the United States, which could accommodate more than 4 horses at a time, in addition to many more domesticated creatures. And this was located at 350 Lafayette Street, so Lafayette and Bond Street, just a little bit up from Houston. Horses were mostly quartered and operated upon on the 2nd floor, but a rooftop garden catered to the sickest horses who were in need of fresh air and sunshine, and they were lifted there by a state-of-the-art, heavy-duty elevator. Autopsies were also conducted on the roof, and the dead animals were disposed of in a basement incinerator. So it was like everything.
Service.
Oh, yeah. Perhaps most curious of all, of course, is an entire floor served as an apartment for the hospital's lead veterinarian, Dr. Bruce Blair. Which, I mean, someone's got to make a movie about Dr. Bruce Blair and the horses. Because, again, it's who you know in the city and the interesting course of real estate. So,
and this building still stands.
and the building still stands, actually.
But no
yes.
more horses on the roof.
I don't think so, but who knows? People are crazy in New York.
Here you go. Now we're moving over to the West Village. As listeners to our show know, we really like talking about grids, the grid system, the various grids, because it's not just the first grid that was created by the commissioner's plan, but there were already other grid systems in place in New York. The West Village had a grid system. There was a grid system in the East Village, et cetera. So this particular item, number 5, is from the feature that we call Stand Here in the book. It's for each chapter, we ask you to stand in a particular place and cast your eyes upon something that you might have otherwise missed or overlooked. So this is Stand Here on the top of the Mosaic Triangle. This is on the southwest corner of 7th Avenue and Christopher Street, outside of the Village Cigar Shop. You know the place. In front of the Village Cigar Shop, at the most bustling intersection of the West Village, sits a much contested piece of property, marked with a tile plaque that states, "Property of the Hess Estate, which has never been dedicated for public purposes." When the city decided to unceremoniously plow 7th Avenue through the West Village in the 1910s, they used the power of eminent domain to acquire all properties that stood in the way. Property owner David Hess, suddenly richer, but nonetheless irked by the imposition, discovered that a tiny smidge of his old land had been missed by the surveyor's map. Hess refused to donate this minuscule bit of property to the city and instead planted this plaque here in 1922 in stubborn and smirking defiance.
I mean, it's about the size of like the home run plate and by the way, that's where I get all my cigars. Is this cigar?
All
is
of
the
them.
Village cigars.
Check it out next time you're walking by.
We're going to go to the Owls of Herald Square. I was doing that dramatically. The building on the northern end of Herald Square today houses a bank and a chain drugstore. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here because this particular spot just north once sat the publishing offices of the New York Herald. Its presses were at the street level, and the paper's publisher, James Gordon Bennett, installed large glass windows to draw audiences to the sight of the ink literally hitting the paper. James Gordon Bennett Jr. inherited the New York Herald, as well as his comfortable, lavish lifestyle, from his father. While adroit at running a newspaper, his social behaviors were a bit more erratic and brash. So much so that the early 20th expletive, Gordon Bennett, actually he inspired that, and it meant surprise or alarm, although I don't suppose anyone would know if you shouted Gordon Bennett on the street today, if they would like look at you funny, perhaps. Among other obsessions, Bennett was particularly taken with owls. He even planned to be buried within a tomb that featured a 200-foot owl. But the architect of that project, Stanford White, would be murdered before it could be designed. White did, however, design the Herald offices in the 1890s and included more than 24 owls in the facade with eyes that glowed in the dark. Today, these owls grace the southern entrance to Herald Square, their eyes coldly gazing at the pedestrian rush around them. Meanwhile, behind the massive granite monument is a doorway with an unusual etching, another owl, this one accompanied by a French expression, which Tom will pronounce because I am horrible with accents.
What? La nuit porte conseil.
Or let's sleep on it. By the way, the Owl of Minerva just happens to be the emblem of the mysterious Illuminati, the shadowy, all-powerful organization with alleged ties to some of the darkest and most ancient secrets. Could their headquarters be contained within the custodian's closet? No, actually they're not. They're actually across the street at the Victoria's Secret. But
moving up to Bryan Park, this is the Crystal Palace. Spacious, formerly lovely, Bryan Park is named for the famed poet and newspaper editor William Cullen Bryant, who lived from 1794 to 1878, who sits at the eastern end of the park looking out over the lawn. The park is indeed once again fabulous today, finally after decades of deterioration and renovation. Bryant stares over a lawn that holds two incredible secrets. In 1853, the grounds were home to the New York Crystal Palace, a magical World's Fair, housed in an immense glass and steel steampunk castle that brought together dazzling inventions, including the elevator, and a superb collection of sculptures and paintings to the New York public. It was America's stage for technology and invention, a celebration of an industrious new age, until it burned to the ground in just 30 terrifying minutes on October 5th, 1858. Today, an equally impressive collection sits below the park, 120,000 square feet of library shelving, accommodating more than 3.2 million books. This makes Bryan Park the smartest park in the universe.
I mean, that's where you see, if you could see the Bryan Park summer movies, that's where you're sitting. Now, the next place I'll take you to is today, it's on East 68th Street between York Avenue and the FDR Drive, between Rockefeller University and New York Presbyterian Hospital. Now, these two institutions today, in their respective campuses and complexes, an anchor of medical care and research in the United States, make up the most important sector of the Upper East Side. The university, founded by John D. Rockefeller in 1901, specializes in biological and medical sciences, which are on display next door at New York Presbyterian Hospital, an institution that traces its roots to the city's first hospital in 1771. But imagine if these weren't there at all. For alas, this was the proposed location of a not-so-central park. Back in the 18th century, this was one of the most densely forested forested areas of the island, located miles north of the city. At the heart of this forest was a small 19-acre farm artfully called the Louvre. It was called Jones Wood. Later, two of New York's most famous families, the Schermerhorns and the Bayards, built mansions and placed family crypts here. For decades afterwards, adventurers would find broken tombstones in the brush, inspiring a host of ghost stories. By the 19th century, the woods had become a popular day trip for nearby city dwellers. Stories of its mysterious past drew those seeking a little recreation and fresh air. So many were drawn into the woods, in fact, that it became, according to one account, quote, the first major U.S. amusement park, complete with beer gardens, sporting events, and immense spaces for large gatherings. In the mid-19th century, as city planners were debating where to plant that enormous new park, the forest emerged as a natural candidate. Its proponents claimed that its lush riverfront and dense growth of forested trees made it an ideal, logical, and convenient choice. However, Olmsted and Vaux's plan for a much more central park won out, and old Jones Woods, over time, was almost entirely deforested.
All right, from the Upper East Side to the Upper West Side. Now, I'm sure that many people know Pomander Walk. This is a little bit less obscure, but it's worth noting also that probably half of the people who listen to our podcast are from outside of New York. So we have quite a listenership who is living around the country and around the world, really. And so we're trying to also get them to places that might be a little bit off the typical tourist path. And so here we are, between 94th and 95th, and between Broadway and West End Avenue. Down the slope from Symphony Space is an enclave of 27 buildings so unusual that you'd be forgiven for thinking that you'd stumbled onto the set of a fantasy film. Is that Elijah Wood with pointy ears over there? No, it's an enchanted residential hideaway called Pomander Walk, named for a 1910 play that featured a set of 18th century London. That feel was emulated here in 1921 by restaurateur Thomas Healy, so a restaurant owner who built a theatrical village in which theatrical people could live. Brightened with flamboyant paint jobs, the gated little street is one of New York's most secretive and sought-after cooperatives. If you find one of these on the market, sell your firstborn and make a bid.
It's really beautiful. It would have been great if I had a picture of it instead of the sign, but all right.
We couldn't get in.
Well, we could. Actually, it's private. Last but not least is one of my favorite hidden places, perhaps the one that's most difficult to find of all of the ones that we've just described. And that is the Amiable Child. This is just north of Grant's Tomb along Riverside Drive.
Can we just ask if anybody who knows this monument?
So I think you're going to love this. So the quote on the funeral urn that's located, it's near Grant's Tomb, but it's not that easy to find. It says, quote, erected in the memory of an amiable child, St. Clair Pollock, died the 15th of July, 1797, in the 5th year of his age. It is believed that little St. Clair fell from one of the cliffs overlooking the Hudson River. He perished at a time when so many changes began to take hold in the city, and yet his memory has, perhaps rather strangely, lived on. The Amiable Child Memorial has touched and intrigued New Yorkers for decades, inspiring wistful poets and thinkers. In fact, it inspired the following poem by Catherine Markham. At Riverside on the slow hill slant, two memoried graves are seen. A granite dome is over Grant, and over a child, the green. The present urn dates only from 1967, and it's the third one that has marked this grave. The boy's father wrote in 1800 to the new owner of the property, quote, there is a small enclosure near your boundary fence within which lie the remains of a favorite child, covered by a marble monument. You will confer a peculiar and interesting favor upon me by allowing me to convey the enclosure to you so that you will consider it a part of your estate. And to this day, it's still part of the experience of going to Riverside Drive and is one of the most mysterious and treasured secrets in Old New York.
So that takes us to the end, or to the top of our tour. We've gone from the bottom to the top with these 10 sites. And those are just 10 of the places to visit that are in the book. If you're interested, we have about 440 more.
And a handful of those we go into a lot more depth into. Each chapter, which is based on a neighborhood, is one big thing that's in focus. Like, for instance, Central Park our focus is on Cleopatra's Needle, which is the Egyptian obelisk that sits there. So we try to find things that are slightly off the beaten path, but may have stories that would enchant you. So.
And Greg is being a little bit modest here because just a word about how we wrote the book. After they approached us a year ago and said, "Do you want to do this?" and we made it, we had to make some decisions about how the book could work, possibly as a travel guide, a historical travel guide, but how do you include things that are no longer there? It was, it wasn't so clear to us at the beginning. And also being two people in a podcast, we didn't really know how to even move forward with the writing of the book. So Greg wore through several pairs of shoes.
Nice calf muscles, walked most of the streets of Manhattan.
He wrote the first draft of it, and then I worked on the edits and the fact-checking, and also trying to bring...
and made it us.
Added a couple puns, some jokes. So
couple puns, okay? There's a couple puns on per paragraph. No, I'm kidding. There aren't that many.
Some got cut. So yes, if anybody has any questions about the book, about the podcast, about the subjects covered in the book, please feel free to ask. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you do your own research for the podcast?
Yeah.
Other people help at all?
People do help. Certainly. I mean, we usually structure a podcast like this last one was on Beach's Pneumatic Railroad, or the transit, and Greg comes up with an overview, like an outline of it, and he assigns a part to me, a part to him, a part to me, and a part to him. So it's broken into 4 sections, and then we do our own research, but we rely as well on the help of archivists and librarians. I spend a lot of time at the New York Public Library around the corner, rare books.
I mean, this is a really intriguing time in terms of discovering history, because just in the past few years, we all have access to these extraordinary archives that have been digitized in the past 5 years. So, I mean, the kind of newspapers, I can flip through, I can find something that I'm looking for and read 25 newspaper articles that I think,
contemporary.
That 15 years ago, it would have taken me a month to go through the microfiche, and my arm would have been tired. But then this was it's just an extraordinary way to experience history. And I think it's a revolution, actually, in historical writing and scholarship.
I would also say that just for example, for that Beach's Pneumatic Transit podcast that we just did, in the rare books room on the 3rd floor, I was able to look through a piece of literature that Beach put out in 1883, after they got the charter and they were trying to raise some money and that sort of thing. So I went through it, and I actually typed it all out on my laptop, thinking I'll never be able to see this again. And then I went home and I just looked on Google Books, and they had it all scanned in. However,
okay, but Tom's being you're being humble, because for our Nikola Tesla show, you also got a nice exploration of the New York Times archives, and you actually got
Public Library.
New York Public Library, and you actually got a handful of his original letters, and some of them were between him and Stanford White, and those were nowhere to be found. It was extraordinary.
And that was my point about even if you can look at it on your laptop, you can look at a digitized Google Book. It's not as magical, as holding this thing from 1883, where you just feel connected to it in a different way. So I think we prefer touching the thing, yeah. White gloves.
Just briefly, you mentioned Robert Moses. I'm in the middle of Power Broker right now.
Good luck.
And I've lived here my whole life, but now it's changed everything I see, whether it's the West Side Highway, I can't walk past a park without analyzing it, the Tribune Bridge, the Van Wyck.
Yeah.
Where are you going with Moses, or where have you been? Or
So it's,
Tell me,
it's
'cause-
interesting because we have a unique approach to Robert Moses because obviously he's someone who inspires a lot of passion in people. So when we originally did the show, and even when we originally did Jane Jacobs, and I think most of the time that when we approach Robert Moses, that we're always like, okay, one of us has to be devil's advocate because we have a lot of strong feelings about Robert Moses and the things that he did, the things that were good and the things that were very, very bad, right? We have a whole list of things that are pros and cons that were his contributions to the city. So
Yeah, like you can say, destroyer of entire neighborhoods and destroyer of, communities. But it could also be argued that he was trying to save New York, at a very difficult time, and trying to keep people from fleeing to the suburbs, and trying to make it easier to get around. And I dare say that anybody who's been stuck in traffic trying to get across Midtown, when you explain that he was working on that very conundrum, and trying to get something built to help people move a little bit faster around the city, it's complicated.
well, some of it didn't age well. Needless to say.
Right.
So, and needless to say, we are very conflicted about this, and it's something that's interesting to explore because I feel like, with Robert Moses comes a lot of other, it's the story of Jane Jacobs, and is that 100%? Has that been 100% beneficial to the city?
Although she's hardly in Power Broker, right?
Yeah. No,
She's mentioned.
at all.
Is she mentioned once? No.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, it is hard to argue like, wow, this really could have used a few extra chapters. So,
Wow. Back there, in the back.
First off, great presentation.
Thank you.
You showed the picture of Bryan Park with the Crystal Palace. I'm curious what looked like some shacks or something in there.
that is such a good,
what was
interesting
that?
picture because there are no. I think this is the only. I'm sorry. Whoops. I don't. It's one of the only. Okay. Well, just imagine that in your mind.
We're going to give you a window into the.
Well, it's one of the. It was one of the only photographs taken of it because that's in the 1850s, right? But it would make sense that if something was going to be photographed, it would be the Crystal Palace because this is where all of the marvels of the day were exhibited. So actually, I was trying to think of. I don't know exactly what corner that is. With that little tiny house and the. Do you happen to know?
Right.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm. Well,
Right.
that would actually put it into
In
perspective.
case you didn't hear that, they cut off the reservoir, which was facing Fifth Avenue from that shot, and which was dominating. And actually, the Crystal Palace, it was built right up against it.
Yeah.
Right? Sure. Yeah.
The visuals would have been, if you approached it, was like this sort of delicate, beautiful, magical building, but then over there was the Egyptian monolithic Murray Hill Reservoir, which was a solid, beautiful building also, but was demolished to build the public library main branch.
Well, let's see. Let's make a deal.
Guys, do you have a favorite neighborhood? And I'm hoping you say it's Inwood because that's where I'm from.
Oh, I mean, favorite Manhattan neighborhood?
favorite
Because I don't think, that's very fraught to say. What if I said something and,
There are, let's put it this way, there are neighborhoods I think that we both like going back to in the show. I'm forever enjoying talking about the Lower East Side because I feel like it kind of tells the story. It encapsulates the transitions that the city's gone through from farmland to early immigration to big waves of immigration. And to difficult periods and to gentrification. I mean, you've got lots and lots and lots in one neighborhood.
I mean, just in terms of Manhattan, because I could say a dozen outside of Manhattan, I would have to say it's a tie between Inwood and West Village, because I like feeling like I'm completely out of place and lost sometimes, and that's what the West Village affords you, and Inwood sometimes feels like you're in another world. And so I really like that, and the fact that you can get there on a subway. You know, I love the adventure of New York City and being able to like have a different journey every time you go somewhere.
If I may jump into back to the Crystal Palace, what you're
Please.
not seeing there as well is Latting Observatory,
Absolutely.
which that shack business might be part of.
Oh.
But I'm not sure about that. But
Now, the
surely-
Latting Observatory, so this was a tower, and it had the, you had the best view.
it was about 300 and change feet high.
Right.
It was the tallest structure in New York at the time, although it wasn't a permanent structure.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that have been at the northeast corner of 42nd and 6th? Is that where that was?
Believe it was north of the Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
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 And it too burned down. Just
Right, right.
It was made of wood.
Everything burned down back in the day. But it was amazing.
1850s was not good.
It's amazing to consider what people could have seen 300 feet up, you know, in the 1850s. They were seeing the city that was moving quickly, but there was so much that wasn't developed yet in the 1850s.
I think one of the things probably most people agree is that's the personalities of both of you and how you work together that makes it so enjoyable because you're learning, but it's fun and you laugh, you know. Did you ever think of doing a video component to the blogs that you do, like on the web or even more like TV show type stuff?
Yeah, we have.
Okay. Coming soon.
You know an agent?
No, yeah, we have. I mean, it's just interesting because most things, I mean, it seems very natural, obviously, but there's, you know, I mean, our schedules have actually kind of prevented us from doing that kind of thing, but as our worlds are changing, those opportunities are opening up, and so, yeah, we have some talking about it.
Greg speaks in riddles. When he says that our worlds are changing, his last day at his job is on Friday.
Yeah, so I'm just doing this. Well, I mean, you know, we're gonna make this a proper go, and there's a lot of other goodies and proposed things that we're cooking up in the near future. So, I mean, this is my love, and this is what I want to do for my rest of my life is talk about history and be a geek about history. So,
and yeah, and video is a bit more demanding. You know, I feel like audio is somewhat more forgiving, and we can have some bad edits. We can go back and fix something.
I have to stand up straight if it's on television. So.
And we can really kind of crank the show out much faster, just production-wise. So TV or video, I think that's a higher bar to get over. So we would love to approach that. We'd love to go for that bar, though.
Yeah.
We like bars.
Sorry. Like bars.
So I was wondering, and his question led to it a bit. But so you started the career, you're one of the early podcasters, you fast forward all these years, and you still carried a day job.
Yeah, well,
And do you both, or is that the next trend?
No, so it's actually
Podcasts don't always pay.
very good question because just to sort of summarize in 2 sentences what the revolution of podcasts is that, yeah, it sort of started almost like it was some sort of like ham radio operation, and then certain media took it on, but it was never, it sort of existed sort of below the mainstream.
When we started in 2007, we didn't think about making money.
Oh, no.
It was mostly, I mean, talk about ham, right? Because we were hams, you know, and we just wanted to have some kind of a program for fun, you know. But at a certain point, the download numbers got to this other place. And really, it's because of the success of the podcast Serial, really 2 years ago.
Yeah, so what essentially happened was we stumbled accidentally into a medium that then became a vital form of communication. So, I mean, podcasts now are kind of getting bigger and bigger by the day. I mean, people are still trying to figure out a lot of things. It's very exciting. I even describe it a little bit like the television industry in the late 1940s, kind of, a little bit, where there's even like the idea of networks that are forming now, and people are even talking about like, should a podcast be should it have a format? Should there be like a proper 30-minute format, an hour format? You know, it's still very much in the Wild West, but I think it's always going to have that spirit, I think, and we're really, really like charmed and honored to be like, you know, in the mix here.
And also, about 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, we started running an ad at the beginning and in the middle. As anybody who listens to the show knows and has contemplated a Squarespace website, or a Casper mattress,
or a Warby Parker.
Those are sharp glasses, Greg.
They didn't pay me for doing this, but those are the actual glasses I got.
Right, and then we also have patrons, nearly 500 now, people who give micro donations every month, and so that has really made it possible.
We
were
at
one a month.
Them.
Yeah, we were at one a month until we had that revenue stream, and now we can do it every 2 weeks.
Thank you. I think it's wonderful. I've lived in New York my whole life, and I'm interested to see what you didn't cover. You've worn out several pairs of shoes. You know, that's clear. And you've covered Manhattan. And you've been to the library and you've gone to these wonderful places. To whom did you speak? To whom did you go for anecdotal about New York? Because there is so much of that, oral history being, you know, such a significant part of who we are here.
That's a really good question, because we're always talking about what directions the show can go to next, and there's clearly this notion, like a Humans of New York type thing, where, you know, New York, you can look at New York from pictures and it's really beautiful. You can look at old news clippings and it's like, wow, there's New York City, but until you actually hear the people that lived here and that worked here and whose lives were changed, that's the real New York. And so, you know, we have thought about how to, in fact, to do that. In fact, next month, check into the Bowery Boys, because we have a very special treat, which I'm really excited about.
Well, I think we can even maybe announce it. We're going to, for the podcast, have a telephone number that people can call into and leave their own anecdotes and their own stories.
Because we're going to talk about something that's fairly recent history, where people will still be able to have, can contribute to the story.
Right, and it would be great to get those voices on the show as well, because that's like, you know, just like touching the document instead of looking at something that's been scanned on Google. I think hearing the voice and hearing somebody who's actually experienced it makes a big difference. Yeah, so we're going to do that in about a month.
Yeah, but we'll hide we won't tell you the topic, though. We'll make that a surprise. But that's definitely what we have in store.
It's not in Manhattan.
Oh, no.
Thank you, gentlemen. An excellent
Thank you.
Presentation. And you were just speaking about the history of New York. Many years ago, probably over 40, there was a book issued about that old New York you just spoke of called The Good Old Days. They were terrible. And it is a wonderful, I read it, I think, when I was probably 14, so we know that was more than a millennia ago. And it was a tour of Gilded Age New York in every aspect, what it was like to live here, what it was like to work, what the food was like, the conditions of the immigrants. And I'm just wondering if you ever stumbled upon that book and used it in your research.
I have actually seen that book, but believe it or not, that one, what actually inspired at least the title of this book was not that book, was actually, it was the first, I want to say it's the first major exhibition at the Museum of the City of New York in the 1920s, and it was actually called Old New York. And so that kind of inspired, like, we'd already been working on this, but like that really kind of shaped the sort of like, shaped it at the very end. But that sounds like an interesting book. I mean, I actually have seen it, but again, it's funny how every book history books reflect the era in which they're written as well as the era in which they're discussing. So I'm sure our book will be like, oh, that's so 21st century, like in 60 years ago or whatever. And there's always biases and there's always perspectives that shift through changing times.
I was wondering, how long is your process from researching to producing to distribution?
For the show,
Yes,
for the podcast?
for each episode.
It's about, so the show comes out on Friday, and usually by the time it comes out, we know what the next topic is. Sometimes we change the topic at the last minute, but usually the whole thing is researched and produced within the 2 weeks.
It's really, it's pretty intense. I mean, obviously some of the really big subjects we'll spend a couple months, we'll know that really far ahead of time. But
it's also worth noting that since we've done 208 of the shows, some of the, the bits of the research are easier or they've already been done. If we have to, if I have the good fortune of getting to talk about the grid, then I can kind of launch into that, or the way that the island is, the people are moving up the island. So there are certain things that come easier now. But yeah, 2 weeks.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a total honor. Thank you, and thank you for your questions.
All right.
Yeah. So, Greg and Tom, thank you so much. That was just like a terrific, and we know it is the tip of the iceberg. I'd like to quote from NPR. Meyers and Young have become the unofficial ambassadors of New York City history, and we can see how it really applies. And also the really sort of wonderful interaction between you and your curiosity and your knowledge. Anyway, we have been thrilled to have you as part of the General Society Lecture Series, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, you were the one that reached out to us. It was actually, thank you so much.
Well, thanks to Meg Stanton for this. So yes. But yeah. But as we all are, I'm sure now, and many of us who have, I have only recently started listening to the podcast, and I know it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure many of you here tonight who have not listened before will be checking it out. As you may know, many of you who've been here before, it is traditional on these nights that we make a presentation to our speakers, and to do so, I'm pleased to introduce our Executive Director, Victoria Deng.
Thank you. And to add to Karen's comments, thank you so much, Greg and Tom. It's so great to have you here. Thank you for bringing our beloved city to life through your podcasts and getting through to generations and generations about the great history of this city and the great future to come as well. So thank you. And I also want to say thank you to one of your devoted viewers, right? That was Meg Stanton. Or listeners, I should say. So on behalf of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, founded 1785, we express our gratitude to the Bowery Boys for adventures in Old New York we'll do these individually so you can enjoy your moment, with writer and podcaster Greg Young for his participation in the General Society Labor, Literature, and Landmark Lecture Series.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are going to take pictures later.
Yes.
All right. And the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, founded in 1785, expresses its gratitude to the Bowery Boys' adventures in Old New York with writer and podcaster Tom Meyers for his participation in the General Society Labor, Literature, and Landmark Lecture Series. So thank you. Thank you so much. And on the back, hold on. Oh, on the back is are you ready? Your lifetime membership in the library of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen because we want to see more of you. In fact, well, as you were speaking, I just thought it was terrific. We're going to have a table reserved for you saying reserved for the Bowery Boys.
This is a dream. You're going to be hearing me drop this name.
You're going to see a lot
I was over at the General Society. Yeah.
A lot of Instagramming will be happening here in the future.
Okay. And then your poster as a memento. Thank you.
So much.
And we really loved having you. Thank you so much.